Hi everyone. Today I'm going to read you a story called The Spiffiest Giant in Town. This book is written by the same author and illustrator that wrote The Gruffalo, which we've read together, and Room on the Broom, both of which I love. I'll read you what it says on the back of the book. He's the spiffiest giant in town, but not for long. George the Giant is sick of always wearing the same ragged gown and beat up old sandals. So when he sees a shop full of spiffy clothes, he decides to treat himself to a new outfit. George loves his fancy look, but as he walks around town, he meets all sorts of folks who could use his help. And before long, this big-hearted giant realizes that there are more important things than looking good. Let's see what this story is about. The Spiffiest Giant in Town by Julia Donaldson, pictures by Axel Scheffler. George was a giant, the scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same old brown sandals and the same old patched up gown. I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town, he said sadly. But one day, George noticed a new shop. It was full of spiffy clothes. So he bought a spiffy shirt, a spiffy pair of pants, a spiffy belt, a spiffy striped tie, some spiffy socks with diamonds on the side, and a pair of spiffy, shiny shoes. Now I'm the spiffiest giant in town, he said proudly. George left his old clothes behind in the shop. He was about to go home when he heard a sound. On the sidewalk stood a giraffe who was sniffling badly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my neck," said the giraffe. "It's so very long and so very cold. I wish I had a warm scarf." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his striped tie. "It didn't match my socks anyway," he said, as he wound it around the neck of the giraffe. It made a wonderful scarf. "Thank you," said the giraffe. As George strode toward home, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." It does look like everybody in town is looking at him, doesn't it? George came to a river. On a boat stood a goat who was bleating loudly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sail," said the goat. "It blew away in a storm. I wish I had a strong new sail for my boat." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new white shirt. "It kept coming untucked anyway," he said, as he tied it to the mast of the goat's boat. It made a magnificent sail. "Thank you," said the goat. George strode on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. But look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a tiny ruined house. Beside the house stood a white mouse with lots of baby mice. They were all squeaking. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's our house," squeaked the mother mouse. "It burned down and now we have nowhere to live. I wish we had a nice new house." There's a lot of little mice there. Can you guys count how many? I think I see 8. "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his shiny shoes. "It was giving me blisters anyway," he said. As the mouse and her baby scrambled inside, the shoe made a perfect home for them. "Thank you," they squeaked. George had to hop along the road now, but he didn't mind. As he hopped, he sang to himself, My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. But look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town. George came to a campsite. Beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. What's the matter? Asked George. It's my sleeping bag, said the fox. I dropped it in a puddle. I wish I had a warm, dry sleeping bag. Cheer up, said George, and he took off one of his socks with diamonds on the side. It was tickling my toes anyhow, he said, as the fox snuggled into it. It made a very fine sleeping bag. Thank you, said the fox. George hopped on, singing to himself. My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse, and one of my socks is a bed for a fox. But look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town. George is pretty cheerful and kind, isn't he? George came to a big squishy bog. Beside the bog stood a dog who was howling. What's the matter? Asked George. It's this bog, said the dog. I need to get across it, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a safe, dry path. Cheer up, said George, and he took off his spiffy new belt. It was squeezing my tummy anyway, he said, as he laid it down over the bog. It made an excellent path. Thank you, said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on, singing to himself. My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse, and one of my socks is a bed for a fox. My belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog, but my pants are falling down. I'm the coldest giant in town. I guess giving his belt away wasn't such a good idea. Suddenly, George felt sad and shivery and not at all spiffy. He stood on one foot and thought, I'll have to go back to the shop and buy some more clothes, he decided. He turned around and hopped all the way back to the shop. But when he got there, it was closed. Oh no, cried George. He sank down onto the sidewalk and a tear ran down his nose. He felt as sad as all the animals he'd met on his way home. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a bag with something familiar poking out of the top. George took a closer look. My gown, he yelled. My dear old gown and sandals. George put them on. They felt wonderfully comfortable. I'm the coziest giant in town, he cried. And he danced back home along the road. Outside his front door stood all the animals that he had helped. They were carrying an enormous present. Come on, George, they said, open it. George untied the ribbon, and inside was a beautiful gold paper crown and card. Look inside the card, George, said the animals. George put the crown on his head and opened the card. Inside it said, you gave your scarf to a cold giraffe. Your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. Your shoe is a house for a little white mouse, and one of your socks is a bed for a fox. Your belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. So here is a very fine crown to go with the sandals and gown of the kindest giant in town. The end. Oh, I love that story. The illustrations were so much fun, and George was the absolute kindest giant I've ever heard of. Every time he came across someone who needed help, He thought about helping them before he thought about what he needed, until he gave so much stuff away that his pants fell down. But it all worked out, didn't it? I hope you guys liked that story as much as I did. I'll be back to read to you soon. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day.